This message is being broadcast by the Department of Defense of the Republic.
It's May 2025. Now every May I do a revisit of my efforts and the events that destroyed my life in Calgary, Alberta. Now I chose May because on May 4th, 2013 is when everything went sideways in my life, and I began dealing with police, judicial, and political corruption in the city of Calgary. From my perspective, this all really began in 2012, specifically June of 2012, when I learned firsthand of the sexual abuse, trafficking, whatever, of these vulnerable women who attended this nonprofit mental health organization where I worked. And a few weeks after I learned this, Alberta Health Services came and started interviewing people. And when it came my turn, at that time, I knew what I knew and told them, yeah, there's things that need to be looked into, etc. And initially this was supposed to be in confidence, but what I would learn later, it was leaked. And a few weeks after all this, the executive director who I learned all this from resigned. And there was a period of time when there was no executive director, and by now I was already heading up a division of this nonprofit organization, and a new executive director had taken over who has ties with all these what I would call influential people in the city of Calgary. He and I never really got along. We didn't get along at all. And that's really why I resigned when I did, because I just couldn't deal with it anymore. Now, everything that I'm stating, I've shown the evidence of a plethora of independence. And I left. I was asked to stay a bit longer, which I reluctantly did. And it was at that time whomever had the opportunity to drag me personally into all this with a false accusation by a female who became central to my story. And not only myself, but a male co-worker. I had told a few other co-workers that summer what I knew, and they all ended up leaving. And from there, since I'm now personally dragged into all this, I did resign, finally. And come 2013, January through May, long story short, I ran into the opportunity to meet that female in public. The first time was by chance, at least from my perspective by chance. I really don't know that was set up, because there was a lot of strange things going on with running into her randomly in different places that I would just go to, but I don't want to go down that path. So I took the opportunity to secretly record conversations, always in public. I thought being in public was safe. And I was setting, I guess you could say I was setting her up, but really I was setting up whoever was behind it all. And come May 4th, 2013, the two former police officers decided to silence me, and they beat me very badly. And for them, everything went sideways when the female didn't cooperate with whatever false narratives were being said about me. And everything went sideways for everyone. So the next day after the beating, they ended up charging me the next day of alleged assaulting a police officer and alleged obstruction. There's a third charge, I can't remember what it was, but that just kind of disappeared. And the trial began November of 2013 for those two charges. There were no other charges ever. And when the first former officer began testifying, he brought in all this false narrative backstory surrounding the female, which had nothing to do with the alleged charges, but went on this whole tirade. And the trial ended up lasting to the time that there was the sentencing imposed was December of 2016. And I've provided a plethora of evidence again of all the corruption, how even trial transcripts were tampered with. And it's just not me saying this. Eventually, I would have the fourth lawyer, and I think it was the fifth Crown prosecutor, asking in an email, which I've shown, why are the things redacted? And one of the things I noticed right off the top was after the first former officer testified on the redirect, admitting why they beat me and everything else, that was all scrubbed. And just on a side note, even my medical records, when I went to the hospital after I was released the next day after being charged, disappeared for a long time, months. And the hospital had no idea whatever happened to it all. A lot of, I don't even know how to put it, a lot of shenanigans were going on. And I've provided proof of all this. And I filed my own materials for the first level appeal, Queen's Bench appeal. At the time, it was the Queen's Bench appeal. And went to the Court of Appeal. Both times, no rulings on even the Section 11B to be tried within reasonable time was ruled on. Initially, I had fired my first lawyer, had my second lawyer, paid him under the table, everything else, because I knew what I was up against. And I ended up firing him. I took over the trial despite dealing with serious post-traumatic stress from the beating, where they even testified they almost shot me dead. And so I had to put it all aside. I did the best that I could to put that aside. And at times, it did kind of catch up with me while I was representing myself. But what none of them knew, at least initially, was my law background. And I remember when I filed my first set of materials for a voir dire, the trial judge said, "Mr. Maradin, you're representing yourself." I said, "Yes." And he was probably perplexed looking at the materials being professionally filed and everything being coherent and etc. Now, each province has their own ways of doing things, subtly even, and still, it was professionally done. At one point later, he would even ask me if I had any working knowledge of law. He used those words specifically because it meant something. I knew what it meant. I didn't answer. Sometime later, about a year later, he would ask me again, and I remember telling him, "Yeah, but nothing as ridiculous as this." I didn't hold my words. I still was professional and polite, but I didn't hold back. And initially they tried to withhold a lot of the evidence with the backstory with the female and everything that I knew, and when I took over, I introduced it all, which everything kept sliding sideways for everyone. They couldn't cover this up. They couldn't cover up the sexual abuse, trafficking of these women, because now it's all in public domain, and I testified to all that. And everything kept going sideways. And the more they pushed me, the more I pushed back. And the final appeal was dismissed in 2019. So that's how long my trial had lasted. And I did have a lawsuit, which I ended up withdrawing. I was forced to, with the threat of jail. And I look at all the evidence and how all the people involved all said, yeah, this is wrong, but it just had to play out. And now I live in the aftermath of that, because I have 2 wrongful convictions, and nobody cares if they're wrongful or not. There's 2 convictions. So I can never find employment reflecting my education or career history, my life experience. I'll never be able to get employment in that. And there's a whole bunch of other behind the scenes stuff that was going on that compounds to all that. Calgary had the opportunity to clear it all up for myself, them, and everything else. Just think for a moment, they could have just said, okay, we're not proceeding with these improper charges, wrongful charges, whatever. We'll settle, we'll sign a non-disclosure, and I wouldn't be talking about or sharing anything to this day, but it never happened. Real injustice, real tyranny. And I fought right to the end. Now I live not being able to find employment. Regarding that, they left me partly disabled, where I can't do physical work. Plus I've had other health issues prior, and then I have this new health issue now, which kind of compounds on everything. There's a lot that I've been dealing with, and I've been living with destitute for 10 years out of my vehicle, living off the generosity and kindness of others. And when I hear people talk about these fake heroes of the so-called convoy, and just for clarity, I say so-called convoy. Yes, it was a convoy, but it's really the Convoy of Freedom is the whole title. I just omit the last part because to shorten it to convoy. That's why I say the so-called Convoy of Freedom. And how everyone's jumping to these individuals, oh, the injustice, how bad, and they can't believe what Canada's become, blah, blah, blah. These people who support them are absolutely clueless. And these fake heroes, well, they're fake heroes. And they screwed up their lives really for nothing. Those people did not get charged or convicted for protesting. They got charged for crimes. But you can't get through to these people. Now you have these others like Pastor Arthur years ago, this whole grandstanding, being arrested on expressway and all this other stuff. And there's another pastor now, Derek something or other, And everyone's saying, oh, look at this Derek guy. It has nothing to do with the convoy, but he was arrested and charged and everything for praying. No, he didn't. He got charged for other things. 2 of the charges he was acquitted on, and one of them, the third one, he was found guilty on. He's appealing the one he found guilty on, and the Crown prosecution, they're appealing the acquittals. But everyone's just, oh, look at, let's feel bad. And over the years, I'm seeing more and more how stupid the commoner is. They have no clue. There was actually a discussion through a comment section, not related to either of these topics, with someone. And I asked them, how would you know if you, for example, were brainwashed, successfully, or psyoped, or whatever you want to call it? And they said, oh, because, they have life experience, some psychology, this and that. And my response to all that was basically, well, you're relying on your limited knowledge base and relying on the liberal arts circles, the science of psychology, and all this other stuff. You don't know. I even highlighted how a psyop expert, Chase Hughes, said even he can be psyop, and he's an expert. That's how delusional the commoner is. But really, this video is not about the alleged convoy and fake heroes and these pastors who are on some sort of delusional crusade. This is really just a revisit of my story, keeping it alive. Perhaps until justice comes my way, instead of living in the shadow of injustice. But I do want to highlight how all these other people have support and backing and everything else, and they're talking about these others, and there's many, many people just like me no one cares about. And I'm going to say again, yes, there are people who do care and help how and when they can. But when you compare that to a bigger picture, that's where that's coming from. And I thank the people who have supported me all these years and stood by me. And I really thank everyone who does share my story to keep it alive and going. Not just for the injustice that I faced, but what these people who are being abused and trafficked are dealing with. And that's all I want to say. Thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe, comment, and share.
This message is being broadcast by the Department of Defense of the Republic.
Listen to this and write it down if you can't remember it. You're never going to outgrow warfare. You simply must learn to fight. I hear people say, when is it going to get easier? When you die.